In medieval times, the lives of three nuns take an unexpected turn when they meet a handsome but impaired laborer within the walls of their convent. As the sun rises over Garfagnana, Italy, a rebellious sister, Fernanda, emerges with the convent's donkey from the woods. When the defiant sister arrives in the nunnery, the gossiper yet timid sister Ginevra immediately questions her absence during the morning prayer. In response, Fernanda explains that the donkey had escaped the previous night, leading to her search for it. Hearing this, the curious nun wonders if the animal went through the gate or the wall, noting it wasn't the first time it had happened. Shortly after, Ginevra notices that her fellow sister is wearing a black habit, which is unusual for spring. In response, the annoyed nun explains that it was dark when she left the previous evening, leaving her to grab the nearest garment without realizing it was black. Suddenly, gardener Lurko passes by and warmly greets the pious women. In an unexpected turn, the sisters respond with profanity, labeling him as a creep rather than returning the kindness. Subsequently, Fernanda and Ginevra, alongside their fellow nuns, participate in the mass led by Father Tommaso. Following the religious service, Mother Maria confronts the rebellious sister about her absence during the morning prayer, leading the pious woman to explain that she had to search for the donkey in the woods. When the abbess expresses frustration over the donkey's repeated escapes, Fernanda assures her that it won't happen again. Meanwhile, the spoiled sister Alessandra comes from a wealthy family, but remains in the convent because her merchant father supports the church. She sits by the window and embroiders fabrics that the nunnery plans to sell for profit. As she gazes at the beautiful mountain view, she sighs, quietly wishing for someone to rescue her. As they wash their clothes, Ginevra and Fernanda discuss the distant behavior of the embroiderer. The rebellious sister believes the needleworker acts this way because her wealthy father doesn't visit her often. Subsequently, the gossiper confides in Mother Maria about another sister having 2 food portions. In response, the abbess conveys that it's best not to talk about others' food consumption, as everyone's dietary needs differ. Meanwhile, Alessandra finally receives a visit from her father, Ilario. The excited daughter inquires about her mother and her suitor, merchant Riccardo, whom she intends to marry. In response, the merchant shares concerns about the costly dowry, explaining that he hasn't been able to fully pay for it due to various ongoing expenses, including their contributions to the convent. Hearing this, the devoted daughter proposes that her father reduce his contributions to the church to save money and allow her to return home. However, the merchant argues that reducing their church contributions would harm the family's reputation. He acknowledges her desire for marriage, but suggests that perhaps her true calling lies in her embroidery work. In response, the nun begins to feel disheartened, feeling she'll never achieve the life she longs for. Because of this, her father offers encouragement to lift her spirits before bidding her farewell. Following the communion, Alessandra strolls alongside Ginevra and Fernanda, eager to know about her father's visit. In response, the frustrated woman lies, assuring them it went smoothly. As the trio continues walking, they encounter the gardener. Irritated by his presence, the sisters respond with profanity, directing insults and even physical aggression towards the helpless man. They accuse him of withholding their food and go as far as spitting on him. Meanwhile, Mother Maria assists Father Tommaso in preparing the embroidered fabrics intended for sale in town. However, Lurko interrupts the priest on his way and expresses his intention to resign because of the awful treatment he receives from the 3 nuns. In Lunigiana, the talkative Lord Bruno enjoys a lavish meal with his wife, Francesca. While the nobleman enthusiastically recounts a story about the Guelphs, his disinterested spouse subtly flirts with their servant, Massetto, whom she is sleeping with. That evening, the wealthy woman spends the night with the laborer, lamenting her husband's repetitive storytelling. However, as they become intimate, the master overhears them and abruptly enters the bedroom. Quickly on his feet, the man hastily jumps out of the window and returns to his bed, feigning sleep. Shortly after, Lord Bruno visits the servants' quarters and trims the hair of the person he suspects to be involved with his wife. Once the elderly man departs, the clever man skillfully clips the hair of his fellow companions, successfully confusing the nobleman the following day. However, after breakfast, Francesca seizes Massetto as he walks through the yard and engages in a passionate encounter with him. When the nobleman witnesses their sinful act from a distance, he immediately instructs his guards to chase after the laborer. To evade his pursuers, the man dashes through the woods until he arrives at a river. He encounters an intoxicated Father Tommaso, struggling to retrieve the wet fabrics. On the priest's way to town, it turns out that his cart had toppled, causing the materials to spill into the water. Learning of this mishap, the servant lends a hand, assisting the priest in repairing his damaged cart. In gratitude for Massetto's kind gesture, Father Tommaso offers the homeless man shelter in the convent's tool shed. That night after dinner, the servant confesses to the priest that he has committed adultery and sodomy. He expresses sincere remorse for his actions and vows to mend his ways. He also discloses that his master will end his life if he finds him. In response, Father Tommaso absolves the sinner. To help the homeless individual in eluding his pursuers, he devises a plan to employ him as their new gardener. However, there's a condition. The man must pretend to be deaf-mute to prevent potential clashes with the nuns. The following day, the priest presents Massetto to Mother Maria as their new helper. After acknowledging his arrival, the abbess inquires about the sales of the fabrics. In response, the pastor fabricates a story, claiming that a gang of bandits had stolen the goods, explaining the lack of sales. As the new gardener begins his duties, Sister Ginevra curiously approaches him. However, he responds only with a smile and gestures. Later, Alessandra and Fernanda notice the newcomer. When he smiles at the spoiled sister, the rebellious nun misinterprets him as an intruder and brandishes an axe, threatening to strike. Upon Mother Maria's arrival at the scene, she clarifies Massetto's situation, hoping to convince the fierce Fernanda to give him a chance. After learning this, the defiant sister only shouts in the impaired man's ear. Afterward, the abbess informs Alessandra about the stolen embroidery, disheartening the needleworker. To compensate for their losses, the Mother Superior suggests that another nun will join to assist them in doubling their production. However, the disappointed sister sighs upon discovering that the additional embroiderer is a senior woman. To make matters worse, her embroidery frame breaks, adding to her frustration. As Massetto returns to the tool shed, the curious Sister Ginevra discreetly ducks and observes him. To her surprise, she also sees Alessandra entering the gardener's quarters. Inside, the frustrated embroiderer requests the gardener's assistance to repair her frame. As he restores it, the nun openly vents her frustration about the embroidery production and her yearning to escape the convent. However, the pretending deaf and hard-of-hearing man only fixes the tool and remains unresponsive to the woman's candid chatter. After the mass, Sister Ginevra confesses her selfish act of not sharing a turnip with her fellow sisters. She also admits to having impure thoughts but assures them she hasn't acted on them. During Sister Fernanda's confession, she reveals she found a turnip and didn't share it with her fellow nuns. When Father Tommaso notices the similarity to Ginevra's confession, he wonders if the nun overheard the gossiper, but the rebellious woman denies it. When the priest brings up her absence during morning prayer from the previous day, Sister Fernanda defends herself, explaining that she was searching for the donkey. She adds that he should be grateful for her kind act. That evening, Father Tommaso congratulates Massetto for completing his first day of work, and they celebrate by sharing sacramental wine. The new gardener drops his act of being deaf-mute and openly expresses his gratitude for the opportunity to be in the convent. When the servant mentions that he encountered 3 intriguing nuns, the priest cautions him, emphasizing that the women can be pretty harsh. Father Tommaso advises him to report any mistreatment immediately should the nuns cause him harm. Meanwhile, Fernanda's childhood friend Marta visits the rebellious nun and invites her to get intoxicated. Subsequently, they proceed to Alessandra's room, where they all partake in sacramental wine. Intrigued by the noise, Ginevra knocks on the door, prompting the embroiderer to pull her inside. With her companion's influence, the gossiper drinks the holy liquor despite her hesitation to break the rules. A little while later, Marta opens up about the joys of intimacy with men, mentioning how women sometimes create potions from the belladonna plant to attract them. In response, Sister Fernanda expresses their reluctance to engage in such practices, emphasizing that it would be a mortal sin. As Alessandra drifts to sleep, the sadistic nun carries the inebriated Ginevra into her room, where they engage in an intimate encounter. The following day, the embroiderer approaches Massetto and presents him with a handkerchief as a token of her gratitude for his assistance the previous day. The nun then sits beside the servant and removes her veil due to the heat. She gazes flirtatiously at the gardener and shares a kiss with him, which he reciprocates. However, suddenly realizing their actions, she quickly stands up, apologizes, and leaves him alone. During Mass, Fernanda observes that Alessandra's fingernails are dirty. Later, as she and Ginevra wash garments, the gossiper brings up their romantic night together, but the rebellious sister avoids the discussion. Suddenly, the spoiled embroiderer joins them, explaining that her headpiece has become dirty. This initiative surprises the 2 nuns, who know she is not well versed in household chores. When Fernanda asks how her headpiece got soiled, the needleworker fabricates a story, claiming that she assisted the gardener in digging a ditch. Shortly after that, Ginevra attempts to instruct the needleworker to wash her veil. However, when Alessandra becomes overwhelmed by the instructions, she withdraws and simply requests that the gossiper perform the task. After the needleworker departs, the sadistic nun unexpectedly tosses her garment to Ginevra and excuses herself, claiming she needs to clean the cellar. After finishing the laundry, the gossiper heads to the basement but doesn't find the rebellious sister there. In her search, she discovers that Sister Fernanda is doing something strange with Marta in the woods. The woman crafts a potion from the belladonna plant and drops it on the nun's eye. She then asks her to slice her finger with a dagger so she can use it to color her cheeks. Following this, they head to the tool shed where they spend a private moment with Massetto. Afterward, Marta and Fernanda suddenly depart, leaving the man alone. Outside, they encounter Ginevra, who confronts them about their strange actions. Annoyed, the woman simply walks away, leaving the two nuns behind. When the gossiper inquires whether their intimate moment was significant for Fernanda, the strange nun clarifies that they were intoxicated and just had fun the previous night. That evening, a pissed Ginevra lies in bed, thinking of a vengeful plan. Meanwhile, Father Tommaso inquires about Massetto's second day of work, leading the gardener to express his intention to stay for some time. Mother Maria and the priest welcome Bishop Bartolomeo to the convent the following day. Meanwhile, Massetto sneaks into the embroidery room for an intimate encounter with Alessandra. Suddenly, the arrival of the abbess and the bishop disrupts their intimate moment, causing the gardener to speak and hide under the bed accidentally. Once they leave the room, the man rolls out and swiftly escapes through the window. Meanwhile, Ginevra interrupts Mother Maria and Father Tommaso's meeting with the bishop. When the abbess takes her to a private area, the nun openly informs her that Fernanda had lied about the donkey escaping, pointing out that the gates and walls are impassable. She then requests to be in charge of taking care of the animal instead of the defiant woman. A moment later, the gossiper heads to the cellar, where she also creates a potion using the belladonna plant. Following this, she cuts her palm and uses her blood as a cheek blush. Concurrently, Alessandra heads to the tool shed and confronts Massetto about his supposed inability to speak. Initially, the servant keeps pretending to be deaf-mute, but he eventually discloses the truth when the nun threatens to reveal a secret. However, before the gardener can explain, Ginevra suddenly appears, causing the embroiderer to conceal herself in the hay and the man to pretend to be asleep. Under the hallucinogenic effects of the belladonna, the gossiper kisses the sleeping Massetto but stops when she realizes her attraction to women. She begins to overshare, even disclosing that she is of Jewish descent, inadvertently revealing this fact to Alessandra, who overhears her. Shortly after, Ginevra hears someone approaching, prompting her to hide in the hay, where she surprisingly finds the embroiderer. Suddenly, Fernanda, dressed entirely in black, enters the tool shed. She proceeds to bind the gardener's hands and blindfold him. Following this, she leads him into the woods, accompanied by the convent's donkey. Upon witnessing this, Alessandra and Ginevra decide to follow them discreetly. As the sun sets, they discover that the rebellious nun has brought the servant to a witch's fertility ritual as a sacrifice. Still under the hallucinogenic effects of the belladonna, the gossiper impulsively steps forward, disrobes, and joins the dancing women around the bonfire. Hoping for mercy, a bound Massetto abandons his deaf-mute act and vocalizes his plea to be set free. However, believing they have cured him, Marta and Sister Fernanda muffle his mouth with a cloth and proceed with the ritual. Just as Marta is about to end the gardener's life with a dagger, Ginevra suddenly lets out a piercing scream, drawing the attention of the other witches. Upon hearing this, Marta hurries to the bonfire and attempts to calm the frightened nun, leaving Fernanda alone with the servant. In an attempt to intervene, Alessandra rushes to her fellow nun and tries to prevent her from harming Massetto. However, she reveals the truth about Massetto's deception, leading the man to explain himself. However, just as the gardener is about to explain himself, Ginevra strikes Marta with a stone, causing her to lose consciousness. Taking advantage of the situation, the gossiper steals Marta's clothing and the donkey, prompting the two nuns to give chase. Upon their return to the convent, Ginevra begins banging on every door, loudly proclaiming that Fernanda is a witch. As the bishop attempts to console her, the accused nun arrives, accompanied by Alessandra and Massetto. The rebellious woman vehemently denies all accusations, sparking a chaotic and heated argument among the three sisters. Afterward, the upset gossiper discloses that the needleworker had a romantic involvement with the laborer. However, the embroiderer counters by revealing that the gossiper also had a romantic encounter with the servant, used a hallucinogenic substance, danced with the witches while unclothed, and disclosed her Jewish heritage. Upon learning this, Bishop Bartolomeo seizes the sinful nun and urgently knocks on Mother Maria's door, only to discover the abbess with pants on her head. Suddenly, the gardener abandons his deaf-mute act and takes responsibility for everything, shocking the bishop. Moments later, Father Tommaso exits the superior nun's door, exposing his romantic relationship with her. The next day, Bishop Bartolomeo starts a tribunal. As a punishment for Ginevra, he sentenced her to a 1-year fasting penance. When it's Alessandra's turn, the bishop expresses profound disappointment in her actions, mainly because he is friends with her father. In response, the embroiderer pleads with him not to inform her father about her transgressions. Afterward, the high-ranking clergyman reads Fernanda's sins, but the rebellious nun displays no remorse and simply rolls her eyes in response. During Mother Maria's turn, the abbess offers a sincere apology for her sin of fornication, but she also casts a glance and smiles at the priest. Following this, Bishop Bartolomeo disqualifies Tommaso from the priesthood and sends him to San Biagio to join a monastery. Meanwhile, the pursuers capture Massetto and return him to the castle, where he will face the consequences of his involvement with Francesca. He is imprisoned in a jail cell as he awaits his fate. In the convent, an elderly priest leads the mass. Afterward, outside the convent, the three nuns sit in a meadow. Suddenly, Ginevra apologizes to Alessandra and Fernanda for her earlier revelations. In response, the rebellious nun apologizes for not disclosing her true identity. Following this, the gossiper ponders the fate of Massetto, leading the trio to devise a plan to rescue him. That night, the three nuns arrive in the castle and use a turtle with a candle to distract the guards, allowing them to unlock the cell and help the servant escape. They dress him up like one of the nuns and leave an embroidered doll in his place to act as his substitute in the confinement. Afterward, the nuns and the gardener escape through the woods. Meanwhile, Mother Maria runs with a donkey and secretly reunites with Tommaso on the bridge, who had fled the monastery. When they hear someone approaching, the couple hides but leaves the donkey behind. Fernanda looks at the animal with confusion, but Ginevra urges her to move along so they can continue their journey. After the nuns and the gardener have departed, the abbess and the former priest arise and passionately kiss each other before fleeing the area.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.